Okay, so I'm going to start my project here in Substance. I'm basically going to go to File, New. For template, I generally recommend one of two things. If you have objects in your scene that are going to be metallic, let's say, then you can put in metallic roughness or specular glossiness. Either one of these two I think works okay. Yeah, since this thing is somewhat metallic, I'll go with the metallic roughness. Document resolution, again, I usually set this to 4K. This isn't the same as the texture resolution. It's more the working resolution of the screen. So if your computer's a little bit underpowered, you might want to lower that. I don't care about importing cameras, and I don't want to auto unwrap since I've already worked hard to unwrap. And in this case, I'm not using what's called a UV tile workflow. Essentially what that means is it's sort of like you create one set of UVs and then you move them over one whole square, and you create another set of UVs, which is useful in projects where you have very complex objects with very high resolution textures, typically for big budget film, TV. Occasionally now it's showing up in games, but not so much yet. And then I'm going to select my file, which is basically going to be my low poly OBJ. Sorry, FBX, I should say. And I'll say OK. This is going to bring it in. Okay, so I'm just Alt left clicking and dragging to rotate around. Wheel mouse scroll to zoom in and out. And here's the UVs here. Okay, so next up, I'm basically going to go to the texture set settings. Texture set settings. I'm going to scroll down to mesh maps and click on bake mesh maps. Again, my output size is going to be 4K, right? Dilation width, this is going to be dilation with diffusion. I'm going to set this to 16. So again, this is going to push the pixels of the edge of all the textures from the UV shell edge. It's going to push it out 16 pixels, okay? And then I'm going to click on this little kind of looks like a page or a paper icon for high definition mesh, and I'll locate my high poly FBX. It will take a moment to load, especially if you have multi-million poly mesh. Like, even though I decimated this, I did basically I'll put this quite high. Okay, mainly you want to check on the faces that are sticking out that there is coverage, that there is no red. I have red just on the back, mainly because I'm not covering that space. If you needed to, you could adjust this by increasing the frontal or rear distance, but in this case it's not going to do too much. And basically what it's doing is comparing the two surfaces and generating a series of texture maps, normal maps, world space normal, and all these additional maps like curvature and position allow things like smart materials, right, to essentially allow you to kind of create wearing on edges and creases and crevices and add dust and things like that. So I'm going to hit Bake Selected Maps, and you'll see it go through and generate some really nice, high-quality textures. So that's really how we get the best of both worlds, right, of a super high poly mesh and a low poly mesh. We're extracting that detail through texture. So I'll hit Return to Painting Mode. So now we see the normal map show up, which is, again, great compared to the way it looked, right? Yeah, my model, it's sort of this kind of dark gray, and it's got a bit of red in it, a little bit of blue, which I think is more from the highlight, but it's almost like an old copper, right, kind of worn copper surface. So sometimes I'll just look directly for that type of material. Copper, no. Metal, maybe just metal. And these are sort of basic materials. There are also additional smart materials as well, so we can look up metal materials here. So maybe I'll look for, old iron, even though it's not copper, it's kind of comparable. So if you kind of left click and drag that onto the mesh, we'll see it over here in our layers. This basically becomes kind of like our new base layer. I don't really need the old layer here. I can probably just cut the layer. And with smart materials, they do have kind of things added to them. So there's sort of like some additional edge work. There's some basic iron color, okay? You can still add in here additional, if I wanted to, let's say, shift the color a bit, I can right click and say, maybe I'll add a fill layer, right? And I'll scroll down here. This is down here in this section. So just under color, you know, maybe I'll add a bit of that kind of like reddish brown. And I'll make it maybe a little bit darker. Yeah, I think that looks good. Yeah, I'll make it a little more desaturated though. A little darker, a little more desaturated. So kind of like Photoshop, right? We can kind of flick off and on the color for that. Maybe I'll put this below on the iron, just to maybe add color to the iron. And that actually looks a lot better, right? So we get this kind of different layers of wear and tear. And it's sort of in addition to what's already there, which is quite nice. So sometimes too, you can set the blending mode to usually something like screen, overlay, so we can sort of see how it affects the surface. And I like to, I do this in Photoshop too, where I actually kind of like this green on top. It looks pretty cool because it's sort of giving me some of these green highlights. And then I could also duplicate the effect layer, right, and switch its blending mode. So I think it was on subtract. So sometimes I think just experimenting and playing with the layers is really, really fun and interesting. Yeah, so I think this kind of like splotchy unevenness, this is on light. I think it's like lighten, maybe. Yeah, if I'm not sure about that, I could always just cut that as well. I could just cut the effect and maybe close this up. We can also add generators too. So generators are kind of nice. I might add this generator just on top of everything else. Oops, let me cut that. So yeah, in generator, you can click on this and then have some other kind of like texture. Let's say like dripping effects, right? We can have that added in. I may not want it as part of the roughness or let's say the metallic or the emissive or any of these other layers. So you can kind of control where and how that's affecting the surface. And again, we can scroll down and maybe sort of check out some of the other parameters or attributes. For me though, I think I'm going to delete that. I may want this as a separate layer. So I kind of like the overall look now. It sort of feels a bit more like the object I have. And again, you can basically layer materials if you want, smart materials. So yeah, I'll look up maybe some rust as well. I know this thing had some pretty nasty rust, steel rust. Let's go in here and look at, I like this rust too. This is more of a generic material. So I'll left click and drag this on top of the overall iron. And so again, kind of like a mask, if I go to maybe generator, yeah, I'll try the dripping generator again. And let's try this in the 3 materials here. There we go. So I'm getting this like dripping rust material, right, kind of coming through. The other thing too, let me just turn off the roughness for a second. Yeah, I don't want the roughness at play. The height might be a bit too much, but we can always adjust that too through the metal rust itself. So if you scrub into or adjust the heights, we can play with that. Okay, so I'm going to just take a look at this, the rust spread. I don't want it as spread out as that. I'm going to maybe also play with the rust contrast and drop it. So for me, a lot of this is kind of like just messing around a bit with this and yeah, seeing what kind of effect I get out of this. Again, let's check the blending mode too. Yeah, in fact, I may, instead of using this as a generator, I may want this as a mask. So I'm going to try to cut this and right-click and say, add a black mask. And then I'll click on the mask itself and see if I can add a generator in the mask. There, I think that's working better actually. So now we see the original material, and in the mask I put a generator in that, right? So now the generator is really focusing, right? this rust in some of these very, very fine areas. Okay, and I'll check out the metal rust too. So we've got like different sizes as well for the rust. So maybe I'll play around with the, yeah, some of the like settings for that material. Yeah, rust variation. Yeah, the tiling. So if I wanted more sort of smaller kind of areas, which I think I do, I want a few more like corroded areas that are smaller, then I can increase the tiling of that material. Something else that sometimes happens is that, you know, you may see the UV edges quite clearly, and if you want to avoid that, sometimes what we can do is switch our projection. So right now it's on UV, but you can go to triplanar, which can sometimes evade that. In this case, it's not an issue for the material, but I think maybe for the old iron, let me go to, let's say, the edges. I'll try triplanar. And basically what it is doing is creating like a box where it's projecting texture from front to back, left to right, top and bottom. And what's kind of nice about it is you get these kind of blending edges. This material overall, I think, is a fair bit exaggerated, I would say, compared to what I've got, but I'm okay with it. I think it looks pretty interesting. So again, don't feel like you have to use smart materials. You can do hand-painted stuff. So I can add a fill layer. Right, and then you can paint on those fill layers. For now, I think I'm okay with this. I'm going to just undo a bit. There we go. So I'll kind of wrap this up with just doing the bake of this texture, and then we'll move on to basically loading and rendering in Arnold. So for this, I'll go to File, Export, Textures. So I do recommend you kind of pick your project folder. So I'll set this up here. I'll just basically create a texture folder. By the way, you should probably have a Maya project folder, which would be good. So I could call this like source images, because I know I'm going to put that in Maya's source images. Select folder. PNG 8-bit is fine. You can also tell it to export a shader parameter. I still haven't quite figured out how to load this yet, but I'm going to be working on that soon. For the output, I would definitely sort of pick your preset. So whether it's Arnold Standard or typically if you're working with something like Unreal, there are some Unreal options down there. Or you could also use a more generic PBR, metallic roughness, or specular gloss. Either one of those will work fine. But in this case, I want to work with Arnold, so I'm going to select AI Standard. The good thing about this is that it will, I believe, output the correct bit depth. So you do want 16 bits for, let's say, height map. I'm not going to use the height map, which is displacement, but I will use the normal map. And typically you want those to be 16-bit. Okay. So these are all fine. Texture size 4K, right? Dilation, again, dilation plus diffusion 16. So again, we're matching all that all the way through from the UVs to this stage. Okay. Hit export. And that's done. Close it up. I could probably also save my project. Just stick it in my folder here. Okay, and then I'll hop back over to Maya here. I could probably just go back in from my ZBrush project.